Gold has long been hailed for protecting purchasing power over time. Since the U.S. abandoned the gold standard in 1971, gold has risen by over 5,000%, far outpacing both the consumer price index and growth in the money supply, making it the only asset that has consistently preserved purchasing power across decades. Powerful stuff. Economist Darren Brady Nelson notes in Investing News Network that gold responds not only to inflation, but also to the animal spirits of fear and uncertainty, dubbing them monetary spirits that drive both protection and performance, even through boom and bust cycles. On the other side, financial advisor Jeremy Gottlieb warns that gold is not effective on a larger scale as a reliable hedge against inflation and entails more price volatility than most investors can stomach. Critics note that over 2022, even with inflation surging 6.5%, gold returned a mere 0.4%. Goldman Sachs' Sharman Mossavar Rahmani outright calls gold one of the least effective inflation hedges. Yet, proponents remain unmoved. In times of intense crisis, tariff shocks, market panic, geopolitical instability, gold often becomes a go-to haven as many investors retrace to its shelter. Joining us now is longtime policy advisor to the Heartland Institute and former chief economist for Liberty Works. He invented the revolutionary approach to massively cut and control federal spending of CPIX. His motto is to drain the swamp first, defund the swamp. Darren Nelson, friend of the show. It's been a while. Good to see you back.
Yeah, it's great to see you. It's been a while since I've been in DC and with you in the studio live.
It has. So we'll have to have you back in studio, but for now we have you remote, and we're good with that. Talk to us about the gold standard. It's become a subject of some discussion again now with Trump in office, and I don't mean the fact that Trump has added a lot more gold inside the Oval Office. There's some rumblings that we might return to a gold standard. Is that just a chimeric conversation, or is that something that actually could happen?
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think so. I'm not sure it will happen during this administration, or maybe hopefully in the future we get a Vance administration where it gets looked at more seriously. But as we know, Trump is like the most bold politician, and certainly in living memory anyway. And he certainly made statements in the past, even I think as a candidate in 2016, he made some very favorable statements about, the gold standard. Of course, it wouldn't be an easy thing to return to because there's a lot of vested interests, including some of those people you mentioned, actually have vested interests in gold being perceived not as a good hedge against inflation.
Well, the skepticism from folks like Goldman Sachs is not taken lightly. They challenge gold's reputation, and so it's likely that they're because their vested interests weigh so heavily in the financial world, it seems like they're going to win this argument, I think. But is there actually an argument to buttress against them that could change individuals' minds?
Yeah, look, I recently was involved in a report on gold where you put up the two charts that I created. I just went to the official statistics because I was kind of, I was pretty confident it was going to be a great inflation hedge. And, so I've sort of looked at it from 1971 when the gold standard ended through to today. And lo and behold, it actually was a better inflation hedge than I actually expected. It not only was a hedge against, CPI, which was often talked about as inflation. CPI actually isn't inflation. It's an effect of inflation. Inflation is the money supply, right? So things like the money supply M3 measure and stuff like that, which is the broadest measure of money supply. It was an amazing hedge against both of those. It outcompeted them both and really protected you. But the thing that surprised me far more was how it actually outperformed things like the S&P index and GDP growth, but particularly the S&P index, which will probably explain why some of the people who have a vested interest in the S&P don't want gold, to look good. So I was actually very surprised how well it performed. The only time it didn't outperform was during the dot-com boom. If I'm not sure if you're old enough to remember that, but yeah, So, that's a very small period of time. So, I would say certainly anytime you
Right.
start investing for like, at least several years at a time, gold's going to win every time. Sure, you can look at 1 year or the course of months and something else might outperform it.
You mentioned Vance. Vance is very savvy with the big tech world, the Silicon Valley folks, and by default, he's pretty friendly with the crypto bros, if you want to call them that. What is your take on how gold will start looking next to crypto as crypto becomes more of a widely accepted currency, if you will?
Yeah, well, look, it's funny, Bitcoin obviously was the first cryptocurrency, and, no one really knows for sure who started it. But the philosophy behind it was digital gold, essentially. It was essentially, when I said the money supply, that's the Federal Reserve and the big banks printing a lot of money and lending out a lot of money that's not actually backed up by savings. So Bitcoin was inspired by, essentially central banks and big banks creating inflation over so many years and decades, and they wanted to do something about it. So they wanted to at least give another alternative to gold. And they were trying to copy gold, which is why they have these terms like mining. That's not a coincidence. So that's why they have terms like mining Bitcoin and all
Yes.
that. So they were both inspired by
It's interesting. It's interesting because gold is such a standard, right? The gold standard. It's such a standard. It's such a trusted asset that it is contrasted starkly against crypto, which for so many years and even now is still a deeply mistrusted asset. And so, yeah, the rhetorical blending of those two fields is very interesting and certainly not a accident. But I guess the next question becomes, we have a lot of turmoil over at the Federal Reserve, a lot of friction between the Trump administration and what the Federal Reserve is doing right now. Talk to us a little bit more about that. Where do you predict the Federal Reserve and the Board of Governors being in about, by the next quarter? Where will we be with the Federal Reserve? Are we going to see interest rates change in a way that's meaningful here?
Yeah, well, look, this particular Federal Reserve Board, in particular the chairman, is kind of hard to predict. He does seem quite political compared to look. There's always been some a political angle or element to the people who are appointed as the chairs of the reserve. This one's very odd because obviously
Sure.
Trump appointed him originally, and then he immediately kind of, if you like, started to went to the other side. So, he obviously was doing
He
favorable.
catered to the Biden administration.
He was doing favorable sort of steps in monetary policy to help it looked like trying to help Joe Biden or then Kamala win, the election. So usually also, even though, yes, he can stay there, he has a term and it's very hard to get rid of the chairman. But usually convention is if the president doesn't want you there, the right thing to do is usually you resign, right? So, he's being bloody minded. So it is actually makes it really hard to predict what his move is going to be. He seems to be going out of the way.
A fat chance of him resigning on his own.
Yeah, look, with other central banks, from our trading partners and our rivals are actually reducing interest rates. He seems to be going out of his way not to. So it's kind of hard to predict. Right. It seems like there's been a little bit of a détente, sort of, between Trump and him. So I'm hoping, he'll look at this, with less political eyes, sort of look at, where inflation has been coming, CPI inflation has been coming down, obviously, significantly, obviously, since, the Biden days. And even in imports, CPI has been going down, even though people predicted, the tariffs would, cause inflation more broadly, but it's not even causing import inflation at the moment. So I think,
right.
You need
lots of surprises.
You need to weigh these things carefully, of course. You shouldn't print too much money, but the Trump economy is starting to take off. Unlike the Biden economy, where you had a terrible economy and lots of money printing, that's why we saw such huge CPI inflation. That's not going to happen. If they reduce interest rates this time, you're not going to see any significant rise in CPI. In fact, it might keep on going down given the pro productivity sort of policies of the Trump administration.
We'll have to visit with you again once those changes start taking place. But what a roller coaster it's been for all of us, especially the economist class. Darren Nelson, a pleasure to have you back. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, Tim Young takes a spin on headline roulette, and we have quite the roundup as usual. We'll be right back.